Welcome to When Leaders Talk, a podcast about leadership, but most importantly, about leaders. Episode 10, we have a great guest. Actually, after the small pause that we took, we are back online with Simon Yoxon-Grant. Simon is the CEO of TLScontact, one of the leading company in visa processing and applications. Well, Simon is, as you will hear from his accent, is very British, but he has traveled a lot, and he also lived in New Zealand and then in the United States. This mix of culture allowed him to be the person and the leader he is now. A great leader, if you ask me, especially if you consider that TLScontact now has offices in 90 countries, more than 2,000 people working for the company. And he and the executive team had to deal with a very diverse group of employees. And diversity is surely a resource, but is also a challenge. So we will talk on how he can spread the culture of the company in places that are very different in terms of values and culture and so on and so forth. There are a lot of lessons that you can take from this conversation. And actually at the end, when I ask him what are the suggestions that he can give to a leader, an aspiring leader, Simon goes a lot into many issues. So I suggest you actually to take note of what he said, because there are very useful hints and recommendations that can be great for you, especially if you are a new leader. So Simon's approach to leadership has been shaped, of course, by not only his personality, but also his story. And one of the characteristics that you will surely catch from this conversation is not just the passion for the work he's doing, but also this optimistic approach that he has. And he says that it's actually something that he learned from the Americans more than the British, that they are more cynical about everything. And I invite you to go and read actually one of the posts that he wrote recently on LinkedIn about optimism, and I will mention in the interview, so I'm going to read it again. So I'm sure that Simon will be inspiring for many of you, hopefully all of you that will listen to this episode. Before I lead you to the interview, let me remind you that you can follow me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram, and also on TikTok. There are the links at the end of the episode if you like. But also, if you are curious about the coaching, well, something actually we talk about with Simon, you can go on masteryourc.com. That is my website. And with no further ado, I'll leave you to Simon Yoxon-Grant. So welcome, Simon. Simon is the CEO of TLScontact, and he is here with us. Thank you for being here.
You are welcome. I'm happy to be here, Stefano. Great to spend some time with you.
So you're a leader actually of a great company. You're the CEO of one of the leading company in visa processing and applications. I know you have offices in 90 countries. So it's about more than 2,000 people working for the company, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so you know a lot about leadership, and that's why we're here, right? So we want to really explore what is your concept of leadership. And the first question I always ask is, well, do you have a definition of leadership? And if you do, can you share with us?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question, because I believe that your definition of leadership is a learned definition. Very rarely do people come up with the definition themselves. It's not something unique. And right. What it is a kind of accumulation of things that you pick up over time, and then you kind of turn that into your version of leadership. I hear all sorts of stuff about what people believe leadership is. There's all sorts of little snippets, little sentences to describe it. I think it's really difficult to describe succinctly because everyone sees it in a slightly different way. I did hear something in the last couple of weeks on a video. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they were talking about this definition of leadership. And they were trying to make it as succinct as possible. And their definition was a leader is someone who makes something happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. So I like that. I like the thought of that. I don't quite like the way it's structured, because I don't think leadership is about you making something happen. I think it's about you and a team making something happen. It's about leading a team to achieve something that wouldn't necessarily have otherwise happened. But I think when you get into that, when you break that down a little bit further, it goes deeper into leadership being an ability to create a culture which encourages the individuals within that culture to achieve collective success. And then even further, being able to articulate a vision for the future and making it real enough to all of those people within that culture to go and achieve great things and make that vision a reality. And I think that's something that as leaders, we have to take responsibility for. It's our responsibility to be able to paint that picture, paint a Picasso, and then get people to believe that that's the vision of the future. And I think that's where leadership has gone to. I think the most effective leaders in the world are people who have the ability to get you to do things you never thought were possible.
Okay, so basically for you, it's a combination. It's either, performing, of course, achieving a result, achieving a goal, reaching a goal, but also dealing with the team. So going there as a team. And you mentioned many times culture. And actually, I'm curious because, as I say, your company is spread around the world, and you have people, I guess, coming from very different countries. Diversity surely can be an asset or something that you can use to have new ideas and have bring some innovation or bring a different perspective. But also you have to deal with it, right? So I'm actually curious how you can build a culture across 90 countries, and those are very different among them. How do you do that?
It is probably our greatest challenge as an organization. So I think cultural change is the most difficult thing you will ever do in leadership in any organization, because what you're trying to do is change behavior, and behavior generally is learned behavior. As I said before, my view on leadership is it's learned definitions of what leadership is. Culture and the way you behave within the workplace is a learned behavior. Generally, it's driven by the interactions that you've had previously, the leaders that you've worked with previously. What I try and do is take the best of the people that I worked with and then mold that into my version of whatever it is we're doing. But it becomes much more complicated when you are trying to change culture across geographic boundaries. So we have people from all the way from Beijing right the way over to the West Coast in the US. And that becomes a challenge because every one of those cultures is different and they bring something different to the table. Now, as you said, diversity is like a superpower, I think. I think it's one of those things that if you get it right and it becomes part of your DNA as an organization and as a team, then all of a sudden it becomes a superpower and it becomes something that enables you to commit to this process of getting better each and every day. Now, along with the diversity and the cultural difference, you need to build an environment where people feel safe to kind of express their cultural differences and not feel like they have to conform to kind of, what you think is the stereotypical perfect employee. And I think that's one of the things that I learned really early on at TLS. So I'd been in a global organization, but that global organization was predominantly based out of the US and the UK. So our interactions were very Anglo in their interactions. So you're dealing with a certain, it's much easier. And then I come to TLScontact, and the first big kind of trip I did was a trip around Asia. And we went into different locations, but the one that really stuck out with me was when we went to Beijing. So we walked into our fantastic offices in Beijing. We have some unbelievable people in the country, and this is our flagship location. And I'm doing what I tend to do, and I want to engage with people. I want to talk to people. I want to get a feel for what's happening, and no one will look me in the eye. And everyone is kind of looking away, and and being very respectful, because hierarchy in that culture is very different than hierarchy in the culture that I was raised in, and the culture that I had been brought up in a professional environment. And it was a strange feeling. Obviously, I knew what to expect to a certain extent. I knew that was going to happen, but I was shocked how much it did happen. And it was a real kind of wake-up call to, there is a clear cultural difference between everyone within this organization, and we need to find ways to reach every single person. And then that becomes the challenge. What is the best way to engage with an agent or a leader in Beijing versus the best way to engage with a leader or an agent in the UK? And it's fundamentally different.
And how do you combine those things to create a unique culture in your organization?
Well, I think that the first step is creating the environment where people feel like they're part of building the culture. It was not me, it's not my culture. I haven't built the culture at TLS. Our executive team haven't built the culture. The team have built the culture. But the only way you can do that is if you squash the hierarchy as much as possible. So what we did very quickly was we reduced the tiers of leadership within the organization. So then what happens immediately is you become closer to the people on the ground who are actually delivering the solution. That is your lifeblood. It's the thing that drives the organization. So you get a lot closer. I am a big proponent of communication being one of the most important things you can do as a leader, as a manager, as a kind of a part of a team like TLS. And we committed really heavily to communication. So I would spend time with Gabriella, who is a friend of ours, going and visiting our locations around the world. Not spending time sat in an office, in the back of the location, but going and spending time on the floor, talking to the people who were delivering the service, speaking to the people, the applicants who were applying for a visa in these locations, understanding the challenges that they're facing, and then figuring out how we could address them. So one of the things we did really quickly was whenever we went to one of these locations, the kind of initial period would be spent understanding what's going on, what the local challenges are. And then we would spend a lot of time talking to those individuals in different environments. So both on the floor where they're delivering a solution. And then we would always have a Q&A session where we would open the floor to people to ask any question they wanted to ask. And then we'd answer it as best we can. And, you get anything from the personal questions about your background and family, right through to what are you doing with this organization and why are you here? And, what are we going to do with what's happening in the industry? And that shows a certain level of vulnerability and starts to create that safe environment where people feel like they can say what they feel. They can say if they don't believe in what's happening in the organization or if they don't understand. And we've committed really heavily to creating that safe environment. And the output of that is we get people who are much more engaged. Now, this doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone is going to put their hand up and ask a question. That's just the reality. I'd love that to be the case. I'd love everyone to be that type of person and be able to engage at that level, but not everyone is. But what you find is the people who can't do that or don't feel confident enough to do that are encouraged by the fact that other people in the team are. And then you create that safe environment. And then what you tend to get is that kind of collective, crowdsourced culture that we're trying to find.
Yeah, what I appreciate is really this way of creating this psychological safe place actually empower people a lot. It's a matter also of feeling part of it. And it's what I describe as the four-dimensional leadership, because normally leadership, a lot of people think it's just having teams working together like a clockwork, right? Everything is perfect. No, it's more than that. It's also having the people feeling part of the organization, knowing that they can do something and they can impact the organization. And I can see that this is what you want to achieve through your words, your work and the culture that you are spreading in TLScontact. And one of the things I also appreciate is I learned that in 34 countries, TLScontact has been defined as one of the best places to work with, right? And so that's a great achievement. So congratulations.
It is, but what does it actually mean on the ground, I guess, is the question that I would ask. So one of the great things about the process that we go through to be certified as a great place to work or best place to work in some locations is a process of talking and engaging with the people who are delivering the solution. So the people who are right throughout the organization, not the leadership team. It's not my view on whether we're a great place to work. It's everyone's view. It's a collective view. And then we get to a point where we are certified or not certified. And we work really hard at, during that process, making that a safe environment for people to be honest. And then making sure that every bit of feedback we gets a follow-up. So everything, nice. if you provide us with positive or negative feedback, we're going to do all we can to address the issues that you're raising. And I think that's the most important part of the process. The certification is great. And I think it's good for the leaders in those local environments. But the bigger picture is much more about getting better. Again, this commitment to continuous improvements, to getting better each and every day is complex and it's difficult because you've got to find ways of getting that feedback on a regular basis. The Great Place to Work survey is an excellent way to do that. And we've made some amazing changes in our organization just based on the feedback that we've got from that. We've also found that we've got some excellent feedback on the culture that we're creating as well. So, you know, you ask about how we do it and what does that look like? Well, a lot of that is defined by the feedback we get from the team. So again, we talked about leadership before. I think it's a lot of it is about creating belief, and it's almost like that indescribable ability to inspire people to do better. And I think a major part of that is getting your voice and the kind of collective narrative in front of people all the time and consistently driving that home and getting people to believe in that vision. But then also you have to recognize that everyone wants that delivered in a slightly different way. So we talked earlier about podcasts off camera. I love a podcast and I listen to podcasts constantly. So if you want to catch my attention, put it in a podcast because I'm going to listen to it. Yeah, exactly. But there are people who don't listen to podcasts. There are people who don't, scroll YouTube on a daily basis or watch reels on Instagram or whatever it may be. There are people who engage in different ways. And we've had to be creative in what we've done. And if you think about the way the younger generation take in information now, it's much more, small, short bits of information, generally videos. There's not as much reading going on anymore. There's much more audio books, much more podcast videos. So we've had to make sure that we're delivering across all those channels, because if we don't, then the message is not getting to people in the business. Then we have this added complication that a large proportion of our people are in front of applicants all day. So they come into work in the morning and they start processing applications, and they're in a face-to-face environment, which makes it much more complicated. For the corporate team, it's different. They're sat in front of their PC most of the day and they work hard. They're an amazing team. We're very lucky, but they're in front of a PC. So we can get the message to them. We can pinpoint them at any point during the day and get the message to them. With the agents around the world, we can't. It's much more complicated. So again, we've had to get creative. I went to Belgrade not so long ago, and I stopped off at Munich on the way. We have a location in Munich. And I spent some time with the team there. Very small team, small location. We have 5 people in the team and then a manager. And spent some time in the office with them, and then went and had dinner with them again to figure out what's happening locally, how I can help them. And one of the bits of feedback that kept coming back was the work that you're doing on engaging people around the world is great. And when we see it, we're engaged and we love it. But we're sat in front of an applicant all day. So if you record a podcast, we can't listen to that podcast during the day because we are sat in front of an applicant and we're engaged with someone face to face. So then we had to adjust the way we worked, and we have to make things available to people in much smaller bites. And we have to make information available to people in different areas of their life as well. So, can someone listen to a podcast from TLS or watch a video on their way into work in the morning? How do we enable that? How do we make this stuff available on people's personal devices? How do we make it easier for people to engage with what we're doing to then help us create this culture? And again, that's a commitment to how can we improve that culture and get better in that culture every single day. There
are a lot of things you're saying, and a lot of questions comes to my mind. And actually, the first one, because earlier you said that you travel a lot, and that's how you spread the culture, talking to people, and so on and so forth. So when the pandemic hit, how did you deal with that? How were you able to keep your leadership role strong and present despite the pretty much impossibility to travel and to meet people face to face?
Yeah, and I think that there were massive negatives, obviously, from the pandemic, both impacts on organizations and then impact on society and the world, and the things that we went through. You almost wouldn't believe it when you look back at what happened, and the fact that people weren't leaving their houses for so long is crazy. But there were some positive impacts as well. So I joined TLScontact in mid 2019. And then Gabriella and I, our COO, spent time traveling the world, meeting the organization, figuring out what our vision was for the future, and then starting to articulate that vision to the organization. Then all of a sudden we go into COVID in February, March 2020.
Yeah.
And by April, everything comes to a stop. So our business changed overnight, and there was no path to recovery at that stage. So we had to think about how can we shape our business responsibly, both fiscally and responsible to the people in our organization, to maintain our commitments to our clients and also put ourselves in a position where we could recover when the business came back. That was complicated. But the most complicated thing was getting consistent communication going right throughout the organization. Because what tends to happen is people default to email, which becomes really impersonal. You never know what happens at the other end and how someone reads your words. So we had to be much more creative in how we communicated. So we engaged a lot more on Teams. We almost forced people or shamed people into putting their cameras on so we could actually see their faces. So you get a little bit of eye contact. We did really basic stuff like CEO communication once a week. And that was a detailed communication. I did videos on a regular basis. We did webinars on a regular basis, but I don't think webinars really do the trick. I think you've got to have an interaction with people. So we do much more Q&As. So for example, last week we did a Q&A with 3 members of the executive team. We do a presentation at the start on how we're functioning as an organization, the successes, the challenges we face. And then we spend 60 minutes answering questions from anyone around the organization. And people can ask any question. As I said earlier, when we're face-to-face, they'll ask any question. When we're remote, they're even more direct. And that is the ways of us figuring out whether the organization and the culture is changing. When I go back to when we started and the way people interacted then and how hierarchical the business was to where we are now and the level of engagement we get in these type of interactions, it's fundamentally different. And it's fundamentally different because the cultural shift is happening. And we see that in how we interact with our clients. We see that in how we interact with our applicants. But most importantly, we see that in how our leaders interact with people right across our organization. And you get a very different level of engagement. And that was almost accelerated because of COVID, because we couldn't get face-to-face. It's almost easier. Knowing if we were doing this face-to-face, then body language is easier to read. You strike up a rapport that is much more difficult to do over video. And people who are natural leaders find that a lot easier when they're face-to-face to build that relationship. Go out for dinner, you build a personal relationship, get to know the people in your team. It's really difficult to do over video. You've got to really commit to doing it. And we have to encourage all the leaders in the business to take time every day, whether when you're not on calls, pick up the phone and speak to someone in your team, or more importantly, pick up the phone and speak to someone in another team. So then we drive collaboration, teamwork, mutual understanding of the goals that we're trying to achieve. And that has really helped in driving that cultural shift that we were creating within the organization.
And it worked, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. It worked, but I guess not everything works. So, and it looks like the idea that I have is that you like to experiment, try to find new ways. But as I say, not everything goes as planned. Actually, and so my question is, which is if you can share it, of course, which is the biggest failure you can think of in your life, not necessarily with TLScontact, something that is really hard to digest?
Yeah. So I guess the thing that kind of sticks out in my mind is I didn't really engage with my professional career or get any way focused until I was probably about 22. And when I think about the things that I regret, what I regret is generally things pre-2022, because I wasn't committed to anything. I thought I was going to be a footballer and I wasn't good enough. I played all my life, but I was never good enough to make it at the top level.
We discovered we could talk about football for
exactly. Yeah, we'll do a podcast on football as well. But I played it all my life. I love it. It's the sport that I gravitate to on a regular basis. Whenever something's not happening, I put the football on. I love it, but I was never going to be a footballer. I was never good enough to be a footballer. But for years, I thought I was going to be a footballer. So I never really committed to anything. School, college, university, jobs, was never really that committed. And to the extent that when I was 21, I gave up university to go and play football in New Zealand. Oh. So, from an experience perspective, probably the right decision. From a kind of, academic maturity perspective, probably not the best decision ever. And I never went back to my degree. So I don't have a degree. I have a relatively poor academic education as a youngster, because I was never really committed. I was brought up in a working class environment in a school that was not that great, didn't support me, and I certainly wasn't committed to it. So I don't have that academic background. I don't regret that at all. That hasn't stopped me doing what I wanted, or achieving what I wanted to achieve. But what I regret is the lack of commitment to completing and seeing through the things that I committed to achieve. And that is probably my biggest regret. Now, I don't really think about it in that way, because there are things that happened at that time in my life which has shaped who I am today. And a lot of how I lead and how I interact with people is because of my upbringing, my family, the challenges that we faced, the environment that we were in. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But if I think about the things that I would have liked to have committed more to, pre-22 is probably when that was kind of most prevalent in my life.
This is a path that led you here. I mean, that's where you are.
Absolutely.
Despite you are not playing for Liverpool with Salah, or you're still the CEO of a successful company. So, and I think it takes a lot to reinvent ourselves, especially when you're young, because when you're young, it's probably you are more unaware of some dangers, but actually it worked well for you. So that's good. And since we are shifting on a more personal level, there is something that I stalked you a little bit. And I saw there is a post on LinkedIn that I really liked. And when you talk about optimism, and you say, optimism is not being naive or blind. It is believing in a bright future and knowing that if you work together, you can achieve great things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that comes back to the definition of leadership as well. But I'm a kind of historically, I would be a typical Brit. We're somewhat cynical about life and things in general. But then at the same time, I'm from Liverpool. And being from Liverpool gives you a certain level of optimism that maybe other people around the country might not have. Then at the same time, I also went and worked in the US for a number of years. And that shifted my thinking around the negatives that can come from being cynical all the time. So it kind of shifted my thinking a little bit. And when I first went to the States, 2012, I remember that first 6 months being just blown away by how optimistic everyone was around me. Now, I viewed that at that time as a weakness, because I thought, this is just blind optimism. There's nothing in it. There's no substance to it. It's blind. You're ignoring the reality of what's happening. You're not talking about the challenges we're facing. You're just, talking about the future. And then over time, I got to recognize that a mix of my old personality, if you like, and this new perspective on optimism was a positive, and then started to shift my thinking as well. And I think that's where I started to develop from being a kind of a manager to more of a leader. And I'd been in leadership roles right up until then, but I clearly wasn't leading effectively. I was always good at convincing people that we could do great things. And you could argue that is a type of leadership, but it was certainly not effective leadership for everyone. And I think that was because I was quite, cynical at times. I was quite British in my approach to this kind of stuff. And I've shifted that over time. But I think one of the things that happens is people look at optimists or people who are optimistic and people who are trying to paint this picture of a positive future. And they almost believe that they're ignoring the challenges that are being faced within the organization. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm closer to the challenges in our organization than anyone is, because I live it every single day. And I want to make sure that if I have a member of my team that is having difficulties, I'll do my best to help them address it. And I'll be there, this kind of the door is always open that everyone used to say, my door's always open, you always come in. It's now a virtual door, but it literally is always open because we're on Teams all day, every day. And if someone wants to have a conversation, I'm encouraging people to have that conversation. You want to be there for them. You want to help them address that issue. And and then part of that is that kind of optimism of, look, we can get through this. We can fix this problem, being calm through that process, helping them through that process. And then generally that optimism helps people then get out of whatever situation they're in, whatever mind space they're in, and get past the problem. I think that is something that some people have as a gift. They can do that. Some people have to work on it. I definitely had to work on it. I had to develop that skill. But it's definitely served me well, especially in this organization where we've been through so many ups and downs that were not within our control. It's got us to a place where we've been able to see a path out. And, we're back to a place now where we're performing better than we ever have as an organization. This organization was created in 2007. And when we look back at that period between 2007 and 2019, when the new leadership team came in, we're outperforming that time much more than we ever expected to, especially coming out of a pandemic. So we know things are working. We know that cultural shift is working. We know our commitment to our clients is working. We also know our commitment to kind of making sure that we're delivering world-class services working. But we also have to make sure that we paint that picture of what's going to come in the future, because otherwise people are not going to do great things. People are not going to come to work every day and go that extra mile and make sure we're achieving what we want to achieve and get excited about it. And not everyone can. I'm naturally passionate. I love this stuff. I love talking about.
We can see that.
But I think if you're doing something that you're not passionate about, then I'd argue you should go and find something else, because if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to give it the type of effort that you need to give it. But not everyone feels that way, and not everyone expresses it in the same way as well. And again, I think a big part of leadership is understanding that and coming to terms with that, and then helping people be successful in whatever personality they are.
That's nice. Nice to hear. Very nice to hear. And also because I had different experiences. We're really leaders or bosses who are not really keen on having other people growing around them. But the other thing that I want to ask you, actually, you said earlier, at some moment you understood how not to be a manager but a leader. What helped you? Is there any tool that you use to allow the shift to happen?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it lies in yourself as well. And I think people talk about the shift from management to leadership as a negative thing. I don't see it as a negative at all. I think an effective leader also manages on a daily basis. So I see kind of management as managing the team that get the job done, and leading is something fundamentally different. But when you're a leader, you still have to get the job done. You still have to make sure that you're helping the organization actually deliver against its commitments. So I don't think it's a negative at all. But I think the tools to help you make that shift and become a more effective leader, they're more available now than they've ever been. So when I was growing up and when I was kind of shifting my thinking, mine was a lot about learned experience. I looked at the people around me and said, okay, that's effective. This is not. I don't want to be that type of person. I don't want to be that type of leader. I want to be this type of leader. And then I started to kind of tie that together. I read a lot as well. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. I think he is an excellent. He's got a great way of describing leadership. There's many more, but he is someone that I follow quite a lot. But
and he's very keen on optimism, right? For him, he's all about optimism.
Yeah, and I think that he breaks it down in a way that is really simple. So that the tools are there. And I watched something of his, and in fact, I've quoted this to so many people in our organization. This Law of Diffusion. I watched it last week, and it stuck with me, and I can't get it out of my head. This, the bell curve, and then he splits it up into 3 sections. You've got the front section, the middle section, and the back section. So your front section are your early adopters. Your middle section are the people who will eventually get there, but it'll take them some time. And then your back section is the detractors. My natural way of working before I looked at leadership in the way you maybe I believe you should look at leadership was, I would focus on the detractors, and I would focus on trying to convince them that they were wrong and I was right. They were wrong and we were right. And I spent so much time focused on those detractors. How can we make them get on board? His view is, and I totally buy into this, is that you should spend all of your time focused on the early adopters, because what's going to happen is they become your evangelists. They become the people that are going to convince that middle group to get on board. And then once you have that kind of mass engagement, then all of a sudden the detractors it's much more difficult to be a detractor in that environment. And it's that kind of stuff that is readily available to you now on whatever medium you've got. And LinkedIn is brilliant for this. YouTube is a great tool as well. Podcasts that make that transition a whole lot easier. So I think there are people who are born leaders. And that sounds like a crazy thing, you're not born out and all you don't say, it's a boy, oh no, it's a leader. That's not what happens. But you have the kind of attributes from your upbringing, not from before your upbringing, but a part of your upbringing to be a leader. But then you have
the right experiences too, right? I mean,
absolutely, you have to cultivate it. I look at leadership like going to the gym. So if you go to the gym and you work really hard, you can get yourself fit. If you stop going to the gym, you're not going to be fit anymore. What's going to happen is over time, those skills are going to drop. And then all of a sudden, you're going to lose muscle. You're going to put on weight. You're not going to feel as healthy. Your heart's not going to feel as healthy. However, if you commit to consistently going to the gym, it doesn't have to be 5 days a week. It'd be 3 days a week, whatever it may be. But you consistently commit, then you will retain some level of fitness. It's the same with leadership. If you become a good leader or you become effective and then all of a sudden you just stop learning and you stop using the tools that are around you, then you are going to lose that muscle. You're going to lose that kind of ability to think on your feet and naturally lead. And then you're going to have to work on it again at some stage, because you're going to fall behind at times. You're not going to understand what's happening in the environment that you're in, and you're not going to be effective. It's the same kind of process. But again, doing that 20 years ago was very different than doing it now, because now you have all the tools in the world around you. Engage with LinkedIn, engage with audiobooks, I think are brilliant as well. Podcasts, there's so much out there on leadership, management, style, looking at different styles as well. I watched one last week on autocratic style versus democratic style, and that's quite an interesting perspective as well, and where you sit and actually there's somewhere that sits somewhere in between that is somewhat effective for some and some organizations. But until you start watching that stuff, you don't really understand it, and then you get into it, you understand it a bit more. And then what I tend to do is I go down a rabbit hole, and then I'm 10 videos in watching, and then you have to pull yourself away. But the fact that you have access to all of that information now means that you can get ahead of the game really quickly. And if you are a kind of avid learner, you're in a great position right now to become a great leader.
Yeah, and I will add one thing. One layer is the commitment to become a great leader. I mean, you can listen to all the podcasts and read all the books or listen to all the audiobooks or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you don't put an effort into it, you have the best knowledge ever about what it means to be an effective leader, but then you have to practice, right? What you learn, and you have to introduce new habits, and this is easy to say, sometimes kind of more difficult to actually put in practice.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think leaders are the worst people for it. So again, my view is that leaders are sometimes too caught up in their status or their position in the hierarchy to really commit to getting better every day. and they forget what their real job is. And their job is to serve the organization. I definitely buy into this lead to serve concept. You know, we are there to serve the people in the organization. It's not about, you know, being autocratic and demanding people do things. It's about recognizing your role in the success of the organization. For everyone that comes into our organization, I generally interview the more senior people that we bring in, and I'll try and interview as many people as I possibly can. And generally, that's 30 minutes. I'm not going into a deep interview. By that stage, if they can't do the job, then we've got a problem. It's much more about cultural fit. I'm looking for, are they going to help our culture evolve? Are they going to fit into the kind of culture that we're trying to create? And then, you know, that then helps the decision making. But one of the things I talk to people about, and this is a really basic thing, and I've talked about it for years, is I believe fundamentally that no one's role within the organization is any more important than anyone else's. And what you just said is absolutely right. It's easy to say that, but living it is totally different. You know, hierarchy at some stage comes into play. But the way I go about it is, you know, I have a list of things to do in a day. You have a list of things to do in a day. I don't believe that anything on my list is more important than yours. I'm just doing my job and you're just doing your job. And sometimes things are going to come to me. I'm going to have to make decisions that will impact you. You have to trust me to make the best possible decision. And I'm going to trust you to make the best possible decision with the things that are on your task list. And then you get to a stage where there's a kind of mutual understanding that we have to build trust in each other. And it's a fundamental to successful teams. And then when you get to that point, then what generally happens is people will come in, they'll think, okay, that sounds really good. And I like the sound of that culture, but is that real? And then what happens is 6 months down the line, you've got someone who's like, oh my God, this is exactly how you sold it. You know, we don't get it right all the time. It doesn't always work. But fundamentally, the hierarchy is being squashed. So I can pick up the phone to the CEO and have a conversation about something that I'm not happy with. And I can, you know, I might not feel entirely comfortable about it, but I'm going to do it because that's the right thing to do, because that's the culture we're trying to create. I think when you look at it from that perspective, and when you take out the ego, when you reduce your ability to make yourself feel better about your commitment and your contribution to the organization, and think more about the collective contribution, then actually that kind of cultural stuff starts to work itself out as well.
That's nice. I like the idea of the short hierarchy. It's something probably I'm not used to, because I'm coming from the military. We have a lot of steps, you know, before you actually able to reach the boss. You have to talk to a lot of people. And actually, I want to add another thing is a little advertising. Of course, if you want to be a better leader, other than books and podcasts or whatever, you can ask a coach. That's another thing.
So we've committed really heavily to coaching in our organization as well, because I think another responsibility for the leader and leaders in an organization is to build the future leaders and not be scared of the fact that they're going to take your job at some stage. So we actually changed the structure of our executive team to have a leadership director who is in our executive team that reports direct to me. And that leadership director is responsible for helping develop our leadership team, including me, helping find leaders of the future, and then help us develop other people around the organization to then find the superstars of, you know, the years to come. And one of the things that he does more than anything else is individual coaching. So, you know, it's conversations, it's building relationships, it's being open, and it's so effective. Now, most organizations don't have people on their staff to do that. My belief was we were in such a position in 2019 that our leadership team were an excellent team, really committed, wanted to do well, but lacked the skills to be able to deliver what we needed them to deliver. So we made sure we brought someone in, it made a clear indication to the organization that we were committing to this. And then we've delivered against that commitment for the last 4 years. And when I look at the decisions that we've made as an organization, that is one of the best decisions we've made. One of the best investments we've made, because we now have a leadership team that just looks and feels very different than it did before.
That's great. And one of the things I like is this proactive approach that you have versus a reactive approach that I heard from other people, where they try to correct. I don't want to say correct, but improve people performance once their weaknesses show up. So it's a different approach. It's like, yeah, it's more corrective, it's not proactive. And then I prefer this approach that you have, because actually helps people to get better before they start a job in a leadership position and not after. Okay, we don't have much time left, so I have time for a last question. That is, Simon, if someone comes to you and asks you, hey, what should I do to be a good leader? What is the suggestion that you will give to this person?
So I talk to people about this stuff on a semi-regular basis in our organization. I also mentor some people as well. So this is something I talk about quite a lot. And I have some things that I will always talk about. This changes as well. You know, one of the other things that we have to be as leaders is agile. So this changes all the time, but fundamentally it remains consistent. And I have a list of things that I walk through. The first is always remember why you started the journey and stay true to your values. Because I think one of the problems with leaders is they tend to adopt the values of someone else that they think is going to help them be successful, or just adopt the values of the organization that you're working with. Well, that should never change your values. It never changes why you started the journey. So you've got to remember that kind of stuff. And leaders are very good at convincing you to do something different. So you've got to figure out, when do I need to be agile and when do I need to remain committed to my values? The other thing is believe in your gut. So one of the things that I think kills innovation, effectiveness is procrastination. So, we take 10 hours to make a decision that could have taken us 10 minutes. Then we have reduced our ability to be effective. That's a basic one, but it's something, again, that everyone goes through, especially during these really difficult times where you're under a massive amount of pressure. Believing in your gut is complicated because it comes back to believing in yourself as well. And we're all a little bit, we all struggle with that a little bit, believing in our own decision-making, but you've got to believe in your gut. You've got to follow your gut. Take time to get to know your team. This is really important and something that I've committed to heavily over my career, is getting to know the people around me, and not just on a superficial level, but getting to know them, their family, their interests, so you can have a real conversation with them. You can build a relationship as opposed to building a collaborative relationship in work. You're building a relationship that's much deeper. So then if that person gets to a stage where they're not happy, they're going to tell you they're not happy because they feel comfortable having that conversation. I think that's something that, again, leaders sometimes forget. Managers definitely don't do. Leaders sometimes forget. Focus on the system as opposed to the outcome, I think, is one that I've added recently. So if we focus really heavily on the outcome of efforts, so if we say we want to be a 10 million euro company, then we might be able to get there and we might be able to give people the vision to get there. But if we don't build a system to sustain that growth and then repeat it, then we'll only ever be a 10 million euro organization. We're never going to be 100 million. We're never going to be 200 million. You limit your ability to continue to expand and grow. So focusing on the system, I think, is really important. Prioritize communication. I've talked about it during this podcast. Really important that communication is priority, and not just for you as a leader, not just for you as in my position as CEO. People need to hear the narrative and the voice of everyone around the organization. So you need to create an environment where that is normal. So it's normal for people to hear from not just the CEO, but the COO, a zone manager in China, whatever it might be, but they're hearing consistently from leaders around the organization. So they're getting different perspectives. Don't be afraid of the difficult conversations. This is a bit of a mix between management and leadership, because I think this is where you learn more about yourself and your team as well. So address those difficult conversations. I am very much about addressing these things really head on. Now, that doesn't always work because sometimes you can be a little bit too eager to address the difficult conversations. You've got to be careful in how you do it, but don't be afraid of them. Understand your own weaknesses and commit to learning. I know that I'm not perfect. I make mistakes every day. I'm just surrounded by amazing people. I commit to making sure that I have great people around me who will pick me up on my mistakes, who will help me improve, and are in it for all the same reasons that I am. They want to get better. They want to improve. And that kind of two-way conversation, I think, works really well. But you've got to understand your own weaknesses first. Otherwise, you're not getting to that stage. Just a couple more. Commit to continuous improvement. So this is that process of getting better each and every day. We have to, both personally and as a team, recognize that the world is evolving. You think about what's going on with ChatGPT and OpenAI and things like that now, and the impact that will have on the environments that we're in. If we don't acknowledge that, and we don't acknowledge that the business is going to change, the organization is going to change, the industry is going to change, then we're going to stand still and everyone's going to run past us and we'll get nowhere. And then the last is be yourself, be humble, build trust, and try and have a bit of fun as well. So we talked about our mutual friend, Gabriella. One of the things I love about him is, firstly, he's absolutely brilliant at what he does. We couldn't wish for a better COO. However, he's also brilliant at having fun. We always laugh. We always laugh together. He has some amazing habits and things that he does all the time that I love, and he's constantly making me laugh. He's also committed to, keeping himself physically and mentally agile, keeping himself fit. He gets engaged in all sorts of crazy sports. But again, it's about having fun. At the end of the day, if you're not having fun while you're doing it, then I'd argue that this is not the thing that you want to spend the rest of your life doing. So make sure that you push yourself to have a bit of fun during the process, because, you spend more time working than you do doing anything else. You spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your family. Make it a fun experience, not just for you, but for the people around you as well. They are the things I would talk to people about.
Well, there are a lot of things to follow, and so I hope who's listening is taking notes, because there are a lot of suggestions from you. So Simon, thank you very much for having been with us, having spent time and sharing your views on leadership and how to be a better leader. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.